It was a Tuesday morning, when Elias placed his last $40 on a folding table at the local flea market. In exchange, the vendor handed him a lump of rusted brass that looked like it had spent the last century at the bottom of a lake. Marcus, who owned the building where Elias ran his failing repair shop, happened to be walking by with a coffee that cost more than Elias's breakfast. Marcus stopped, looked at the rusted chunk of metal, and let out a laugh that was loud enough to turn heads. "You're really teaching your kid the fastest way to stay poor, aren't you?" Elias didn't say a word. He just picked up the heavy, dirt-caked block, put it carefully into his canvas bag, and walked away. If you've ever stood at the edge of a dead end, mocked by the world but still gritting your teeth to keep moving forward, take a second. Pause the video right now. Close your eyes, and write these exact words in the comments. I choose persistence. And make sure to subscribe to the channel to bear witness to this story, because sometimes the biggest miracles are hiding right under a thick layer of rust and disrespect. Elias was 34 years old. He was raising his 8-year-old son, Toby, completely on his own. He ran a small mechanical watch repair shop that had belonged to his grandfather, a place that smelled of old oil, brass polish, and quiet desperation. The problem was, nobody really cared about fixing mechanical watches anymore. People bought expensive smartwatches, wore them until the battery died, and threw them away. The shop was bleeding money every single month. Elias had exactly 5 days to come up with $3,000 for back rent. If he didn't, Marcus was going to lock the doors and throw their entire life onto the sidewalk. Elias woke up at 4 in the morning. Every single day. He didn't complain, and he didn't ask for pity. He made Toby's lunch, packed his backpack, and then sat at his wooden workbench under a single harsh halogen bulb, trying to bring dead things back to life. Toby spent his afternoons sitting on a wobbly stool in the corner, holding a worn-out stuffed dog, just watching his dad work, to the rest of the world. Elias was a failing mechanic, but to Toby, he was a magician who could make time move again. Later that afternoon, Marcus walked into the shop without knocking. He wore a tailored suit and a gold-plated smartwatch that he made sure to tap every 2 minutes. He slapped a final eviction warning down on the glass counter. 5 days, Elias, Marcus said, leaning over the glass with a smirk. He glanced over at the rusted lump of brass Elias had set on a shop towel. "I saw you blow $40 on that piece of garbage this morning. You know, if you actually worked a real job instead of playing with trash, maybe you wouldn't be getting kicked out on the street." Elias looked up from his magnifying visor. He didn't get angry, because anger was a luxury he simply couldn't afford. He just looked at Marcus, with the kind of tired patience you reserve for someone who fundamentally doesn't understand how the world works. "I'll have the money," Elias said quietly. Marcus scoffed, turned on his heel, and walked out. The little bell above the door, jingling in a way that felt exactly like a countdown. That night, after Toby was fast asleep in the back room, Elias went to work. He didn't know exactly what he had bought, but his fingers had recognized something when he first picked it up at the market. The weight was entirely wrong for a standard clock housing. It was way too dense. He mixed a mild solvent in a glass dish, put on his rubber gloves, and started the cleaning process. He worked for 6 hours straight, in the dead quiet of the shop, using dental picks, soft brushes, and infinite patience. He started peeling away decades of oxidized grime and hardened mud. As the black crust slowly started to dissolve, the underlying structure finally revealed itself under the light. It wasn't a clock. The gears didn't align in the standard ratios used to calculate minutes and hours. They were stacked in a massive, incredibly complex, non-linear pattern. Elias had an encyclopedic memory for mechanical movements, but he had never laid eyes on anything like this in his life. The gear teeth were cut at strange, highly specific angles. They were designed to track something far slower and far bigger than time on Earth. They were built to track the exact orbits of the stars. When the whole world turns its back on you, absolute silence is your best weapon. If you are still here, and you truly understand the quiet power of patience, drop down to the comments and type it again. I choose persistence. Elias wiped away a thick, stubborn layer of grease near the bottom base plate. Under the bright magnifying lamp, a tiny, deeply faded engraving caught the light. It was an intricate compass, completely interlaced with a microscopic gear. Elias stopped breathing. For a full 10 seconds. He knew that specific mark. He had seen it exactly once, in a deteriorated photograph inside a horology archive 10 years ago. It was the signature maker's mark of a legendary French master from the 1700s. It belonged to a genius whose entire life's work was supposedly destroyed in a massive warehouse fire over 2 centuries ago. Elias sat in the dim light for a long time. He didn't panic. He didn't celebrate. He just methodically documented every millimeter of the brass housing. He took 20 high-resolution photographs, focusing heavily on the gear ratios and that single, tiny engraving. Using a secure connection, he uploaded the images to an exclusive, invite-only forum dedicated to 18th-century Swiss and French horology. He didn't make any wild claims. He just asked a simple question. Can anyone verify this gear alignment? Then, he went to sleep for 2 hours, woke up at 4, and made Toby's breakfast. By 9 in the morning, the forum had exploded. By noon, Elias received a direct phone call from a blocked international number. It was the director of the Geneva Antiquities Museum. They didn't ask for a price. They asked if he would be in his shop the following morning. At exactly 10 the next day, a black armored transport vehicle and a sleek town car pulled up to the curb outside Elias's shop. Marcus was standing across the street, holding his usual expensive coffee, watching with narrow eyes. 3 people in tailored coats walked into the dusty repair shop. The lead appraiser didn't even introduce himself. He just walked straight to the workbench, pulled out his own loop, and leaned over the brass block. The shop was dead silent. For 20 minutes. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clocks against the wall. Finally, the appraiser stood up. His hands were visibly shaking. It's the lost astrolabe, he whispered. It didn't burn. Someone smuggled it out before the fire. The museum director stepped forward and placed a single sheet of paper on the glass counter. It was a purchase agreement. The number written at the bottom was $4 million. Elias looked at the paper. He looked at Toby, who was sitting on his stool, completely unfazed, holding his stuffed dog. I'll sell it, Elias said, his voice completely level, but on 2 conditions. First, the original maker's name goes on the display plaque, not mine. And second, when you unveil it at the exhibition, my son gets to push the lever that starts the movement. The director didn't even hesitate. Done. An hour later, the armored truck was loaded. Marcus had crossed the street and was standing on the sidewalk, his jaw practically unhinged. He watched the armed guards secure the heavy case. Elias walked out of the shop, holding a cashier's check he had just received as a down payment. He walked right past the armored truck, right past the museum directors, and stopped in front of Marcus. Elias handed him a plain, white envelope. That's the $3,000 for the back rent, Elias said. And the next 6 months in advance. I'm expanding the shop. Marcus opened the envelope, staring at the perfectly crisp bills. He looked at the armored truck, then back at Elias. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely nothing came out. The silence was heavy, absolute, and completely devastating to a man whose entire identity was built on feeling superior to the people around him. Elias didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just turned around and walked back inside to his son. Today, the shop is 3 times its original size. Elias still wakes up at 4 in the morning. He still wears the same canvas apron, but there's a new brass plaque by the door. It announces a fully funded mechanical apprenticeship program for kids from low-income neighborhoods, entirely paid for by a man who refused to give up. True success isn't about crushing the people who mocked you. It's about staying entirely true to who you are, long after you have the power to be anyone else. Before this video ends, leave your oath in the comments one last time. I choose persistence. Subscribe to the channel. If you believe that a patient heart always gets its due, see you in the next one.